The letter shook in Ruby Reed's hands as her breath caught in her chest. "You've been selected as a mail-order bride for Isaac Armstrong," it read, the words blurring as tears formed in her eyes. Boston, 1873, was no place for a woman who'd lost everything, but heading to the wild frontier on the whim of her so-called friends seemed like madness. She never imagined her life would come to this, becoming the punchline in a cruel joke. Ruby smoothed her skirts as she stood on the dusty platform of Willow Creek, Colorado. The journey west had been long and arduous, but nothing compared to the humiliation awaiting her. Her friends, wealthy socialites who found it hilarious to send her as a bride to some unsuspecting cowboy, had paid her passage with glee. With her family fortune gone and her reputation in tatters after her father's financial scandal, she'd had little choice but to play along. At least until she could figure out her next move. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she squinted at the small frontier town. A single dusty street lined with wooden buildings stretched before her, so different from the cobblestone streets of Boston. Her trunk sat beside her, containing the few possessions she'd managed to salvage. "Miss Reed," a voice startled her from behind. Ruby turned to find herself face to face with the town's station master, a balding man with kind eyes. "That's me," she admitted reluctantly. "Mr. Armstrong sent word he'd be delayed. There was trouble at the ranch." The man tilted his hat respectfully. "Said you're welcome to wait at the hotel, his expense." Ruby's heart sank further. The man didn't even have the decency to meet her. Not that she wanted to meet him, this whole arrangement was a sham. But still, his absence only reinforced how little this all meant. "Very well," she said, forcing a smile. "Could you direct me to the hotel?" The station master gestured toward a 2-story building down the street. "The Willow Creek Inn. Can't miss it. I'll have someone bring your trunk." Ruby thanked him and made her way down the street, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. Her Boston attire, though modest by Eastern standards, stood out glaringly in this frontier town. She fought the urge to run back to the station and board the next train east, though she had nowhere to go even if she did. The hotel was cleaner than she expected, with a small but tidy lobby. The proprietress, a stout woman named Mrs. Henley, greeted her warmly once she learned Ruby's identity. "Oh, Isaac's bride, we've all been waiting to meet you," she gushed, leading Ruby to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "That man needs a good woman, works himself half to death at that ranch." Ruby didn't have the heart to explain the truth that this marriage was nothing but a cruel prank played by Boston's socialites at her expense. She simply nodded and thanked the woman before closing the door to her temporary sanctuary. Alone at last, Ruby sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of weakness. Tears flowed freely as the reality of her situation crashed down upon her. She was thousands of miles from home, about to meet a man who expected a willing bride but would instead find a penniless, heartbroken woman who'd been sent to him as a joke. The sun was setting when a commotion in the street below drew her to the window. A tall man on horseback had arrived, covered in dust from the trail. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. He dismounted with easy grace, tying his horse to the hitching post before striding toward the hotel entrance. Ruby's stomach clenched. This had to be Isaac Armstrong. She quickly wiped her tears and straightened her appearance, resolving to face this situation with as much dignity as possible. She would explain everything to Mr. Armstrong, apologize for the deception, and then... Well, she wasn't sure what would come next, but surely any reasonable man would understand this wasn't her fault. A knock at her door came sooner than expected. Ruby took a deep breath and opened it to find herself looking up at the man she'd seen from the window. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. A few days' worth of stubble covered his strong jaw, and his dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. "Miss Reed." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that identified him as a local. Ruby nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. This wasn't at all what she'd expected. "Isaac Armstrong," he said, removing his hat. "I apologize for not meeting you at the station. We had some trouble with cattle rustlers." "It's quite all right," Ruby managed. "Please come in, we have much to discuss." Isaac hesitated, seeming uncomfortable with the propriety of entering a ladies' hotel room. "Perhaps we could speak in the dining room downstairs." Ruby agreed, grateful for his consideration. As they descended the stairs, she couldn't help noticing the respectful nods he received from everyone they passed. Clearly, Isaac Armstrong was well regarded in Willow Creek. They settled at a corner table in the nearly empty dining room, and Ruby gathered her courage. She needed to tell him the truth immediately. "Mr. Armstrong, Isaac, please," he interrupted with a small smile. "Isaac," she amended, "I need to explain something about our arrangement." He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I'm listening." Ruby took a deep breath. "I was not the one who responded to your advertisement for a bride. Some acquaintances in Boston thought it would be amusing to send me here without my knowledge." She stared at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. "It was meant as a joke at my expense, and now at yours as well. I'm deeply sorry for the deception." Silence stretched between them. When she finally looked up, Isaac's expression wasn't angry as she'd feared, but thoughtful. "These acquaintances," he said carefully, "they paid your passage all the way to Colorado as a joke." Ruby nodded miserably. "My circumstances in Boston changed recently. My father lost everything in some poor investments before he passed, and these women, I thought they were my friends, found my reduced circumstances amusing. They knew I had nowhere to go." Isaac's jaw tightened. "That's a mighty expensive and cruel joke." "I only discovered their true plan when I was already on the train," Ruby continued. "They included a letter explaining everything, how they'd written to you pretending to be me, how they thought it would be hilarious to send a fallen Boston society woman to be a frontier wife." The humiliation burned fresh as she recounted it. "I had no money to turn back and nowhere to return to even if I could." Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "So you have no intention of honoring the marriage agreement?" Ruby met his eyes directly. "How could I? You never chose me and I never chose you. The entire thing is built on a lie." To her surprise, a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Actually, Miss Reed, I did choose you. I chose you based on the letters I received, regardless of who wrote them." Ruby frowned. "But they weren't my words. They described you a woman of education and refinement, someone who'd faced hardship with grace. From what I can see, that part wasn't a lie." His gaze was steady and assessing. "The rest we can sort out." Ruby stared at him, bewildered by his calm acceptance. "I don't understand. Aren't you angry at the women who sent you here?" "Absolutely, at you." He shook his head. "You're as much a victim as I am, maybe more so." Mrs. Henley approached with 2 plates of food that Isaac must have ordered in advance. As she set them down, she beamed at Ruby. "Oh, it's so wonderful to have you here, Miss Reed. Isaac has been waiting for his bride for months." After she left, Ruby leaned forward. "You see, everyone expects us to marry. I've put you in an impossible position." Isaac cut into his steak. "Nothing's impossible out here, Miss Reed. We adapt." He gestured to her plate. "Eat something, we'll figure this out." Ruby reluctantly picked up her fork, her mind racing. "What do you propose?" "A compromise," he said after a moment's thought. "Stay for 2 weeks. Get to know me, get to know Willow Creek. If at the end of that time you want to leave, I'll pay your passage wherever you want to go. And if I stay," his eyes met hers, "then we proceed with the marriage as planned." It was far more reasonable than she'd expected. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply, "and out here we don't have the luxury of lengthy courtships. 2 weeks is plenty of time to decide if we suit." Ruby considered his offer. What choice did she really have? 2 weeks, she agreed finally, "but I can't promise anything beyond that." "Fair enough." He extended his hand across the table. "Do we have an agreement, Miss Reed?" She placed her hand in his, noting the rough calluses against her softer skin. "We do, Mr. Armstrong." His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "Isaac," he reminded her with a smile that reached his eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Ruby." The next morning, Isaac arrived at the hotel with a wagon to transport Ruby and her belongings to his ranch. As they pulled away from town, Ruby couldn't help feeling a sense of trepidation mixed with curiosity. The landscape opened up around them, vast and beautiful in ways she'd never imagined. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass stretched to the horizon, with the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's breathtaking," she admitted, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Isaac glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. "That it is. First time I saw this land, I knew I'd never want to leave. How long have you been here?" Ruby asked, genuinely interested in the man who had so unexpectedly shown her kindness. 10 years now. "Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." He guided the wagon around a rut in the road. "Started as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and eventually bought my own place." "That's impressive," Ruby said, realizing there was much more to Isaac Armstrong than met the eye. "You fought in the war," he nodded, his expression momentarily distant. "Union Army, saw things no man should see. Coming west was my way of starting fresh." Ruby understood that sentiment all too well. "I suppose we all need fresh starts sometimes." Isaac's eyes met hers briefly. "That we do." After about an hour's journey, they crested a hill to reveal a valley below with a sprawling ranch at its center. A large main house built of sturdy logs and stone stood proudly, with several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn creating a small compound. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a creek wound through the property, glinting in the morning sunlight. "The Flying A," Isaac announced. "My home." "It's lovely," Ruby said, and meant it. The ranch had a welcoming feel to it despite its size and isolation. As they approached, a young boy of about 12 ran out to meet them, followed by an older man with a slight limp. "That's Caleb, my ranch foreman," Isaac explained, gesturing to the older man. "And the boy is Rory. He helps around the place." Isaac brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, coming around to offer Ruby his hand. She accepted his help, painfully aware of how close he stood as she stepped down. "Miss Ruby Reed, meet Caleb Jenkins and Rory Miller." Isaac made the introductions. Caleb tipped his hat respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Reed. We've heard a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," Ruby replied with a smile, wondering exactly what Isaac had told them about her arrival. Rory stared at her with undisguised curiosity. "Are you really from Boston? I read that Boston has buildings taller than trees." Ruby laughed, charmed by the boy's enthusiasm. "Some of them, yes, but I think your mountains are far more impressive." "Rory, help with Miss Reed's trunk," Isaac instructed. "Caleb, everything quiet while I was gone." "All quiet, boss, though Johnson rode by earlier, asking if you'd reconsider his offer." Caleb's tone suggested this wasn't good news. Isaac's jaw tightened. "I already gave him my answer." Ruby sensed tension but didn't pry as Isaac led her toward the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, clean floors, and curtains at the windows. It was simple but welcoming, with a large fireplace dominating the main room. "It's not what you're used to, I expect," Isaac said, watching her reaction carefully. Ruby thought of the lavish Boston mansion where she'd grown up, now lost to her forever. "It's a real home," she said honestly. "That's what matters." Something in Isaac's expression softened. "I'll show you to your room. You'll have your privacy while you're here." He led her upstairs to a bedroom that clearly had been prepared for her arrival. A quilt covered the bed and wildflowers sat in a vase on the dresser. "This is lovely," Ruby said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Mrs. Peterson from town helped get it ready. She comes by twice a week to help with the housekeeping." Isaac hesitated at the doorway. "I know this isn't what you expected, Ruby, but I hope you'll give Willow Creek and me a fair chance." His directness was refreshing after the veiled words and social games of Boston society. "I'll try," she promised. He nodded, seeming satisfied. "I need to check on some things in the north pasture. Rory will bring up your trunk and Mrs. Peterson left a cold supper in the kitchen for whenever you're hungry." After he left, Ruby explored her room, noting the care that had gone into its preparation. The view from her window overlooked the valley with mountains in the distance. It was a far cry from the crowded streets of Boston, but there was a peace here she hadn't felt in a long time. Later, as she unpacked her meager belongings, Rory appeared with her trunk, struggling under its weight. "Let me help you with that," Ruby said, rushing to assist him. "I got it, madam," he insisted, but accepted her help in positioning the trunk at the foot of the bed. Once it was situated, he wiped his brow and grinned at her. Mr. Armstrong says you're going to be his wife. Ruby flushed. That's not quite decided yet. Rory's face fell. But you came all this way. It's complicated, Ruby said, unsure how to explain the situation to a child. The boy shrugged. Grown-up stuff usually is. He hesitated at the door. He's a good man, though, the best I know. After Rory left, Ruby sat on the edge of her bed, contemplating her situation. Isaac Armstrong was not at all what she'd expected. Instead of the rough, uncouth frontiersman she'd imagined, he was thoughtful, intelligent, and surprisingly gentle despite his obvious strength. And his ranch was impressive, the result of years of hard work and determination. Could she actually consider staying? The thought was both terrifying and strangely appealing. That evening, Ruby ventured downstairs to find Isaac had returned. He sat at the kitchen table reviewing what appeared to be ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up when she entered, his expression immediately brightening. "Did you rest well?" he asked, closing the book. "Yes, thank you. Your home is very comfortable." She gestured to the ledgers. "Am I interrupting your work?" "Not at all, just checking the cattle counts." He stood and moved to the stove. "Are you hungry?" Mrs. Peterson left a stew. Ruby was touched by his consideration. "I can manage, you don't need to serve me." Isaac glanced at her with amusement. "Out here we all pitch in, no servants, no rigid roles." He stirred the pot on the stove. "Besides, I need to eat too." They shared a simple but delicious meal, and Ruby found conversation with Isaac surprisingly easy. He was well-read despite his frontier life, and they discovered a mutual interest in literature. "My mother taught school before she married," Isaac explained. "She made sure I had books growing up, even when we couldn't afford much else." "Where is your family now?" Ruby asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Gone. Mother passed when I was 14, father 3 years later. It's partly why I came west after the war, nothing holding me back east." "I'm sorry," Ruby said softly. "I lost my mother when I was 16 and my father just last year." Isaac nodded in understanding. "It shapes you, that kind of loss." "It does," she agreed. "Though not always for the worse, I suppose. It teaches you what matters." "And what matters to you, Ruby Reed?" His gaze was intent, genuinely interested in her answer. Ruby considered the question. "Honesty, kindness, the freedom to make my own choices." She smiled slightly. "All things that were in short supply in Boston society. Not much use for pretense on the frontier," Isaac agreed. "Life's too hard and too short for that." After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The vastness of the landscape made Ruby feel small, but not insignificant. There was something freeing about the wide, open spaces. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the ranch," Isaac said. "If you're interested." "I'd like that," Ruby replied, surprising herself with her enthusiasm. "I want to understand your life here." His smile in response made something flutter in her chest. "Good, that's a start." The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Ruby dressed in her simplest skirt and blouse, anticipating a day outdoors. She found Isaac in the kitchen with Rory, both of them eating breakfast. "Morning, Miss Reed," Rory chirped. "Mr. Armstrong's going to show you how to ride today." Ruby paused. "Ride, as in horses?" Isaac looked up, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Can't see much of the ranch on foot. Don't worry, I've got a gentle mare for you." "I've never actually ridden before," Ruby admitted, embarrassed. "In Boston, ladies rode in carriages, not on horseback." "Everyone starts somewhere," Isaac said easily. "I'll teach you." After breakfast, they walked to the stables where Isaac introduced her to Daisy, a dappled gray mare with gentle eyes. "She's steady as they come," he assured Ruby. "Perfect for beginners." Ruby approached the horse cautiously, extending her hand as Isaac showed her. Daisy snuffled at her palm, warm breath tickling her skin. "She likes you," Isaac observed, bringing over a saddle. "Now, the first thing to know about riding is that it's a partnership. You and the horse work together." He demonstrated how to saddle and bridle Daisy with efficient movements, then showed Ruby how to mount. After a few awkward attempts, she found herself seated in the saddle, gripping the horn tightly. "Relax your body," Isaac instructed, adjusting her posture. "If you're tense, she'll sense it." "Breathe deeply." Ruby tried to follow his guidance, acutely aware of his hands steadying her. His touch was respectful but sent an unexpected warmth through her nonetheless. "That's better," he praised. "Now we'll start slow, just around the corral until you get comfortable." For the next hour, Isaac patiently taught Ruby the basics of riding. By the time they stopped for a break, she'd progressed from terrified stillness to cautious enjoyment. "You're a natural," Isaac said as he helped her dismount. Ruby laughed, feeling her muscles protest the unfamiliar activity. "I doubt that very much, but thank you for the encouragement." "I mean it," he insisted. "You listen well and you're not afraid to try. That counts for a lot out here." After watering the horses, Isaac suggested they ride to the creek for lunch. Ruby hesitated but agreed, finding her second time mounting much easier. They rode side by side at a walk, Isaac pointing out features of the landscape and explaining his operation. "We run about 500 head of cattle," he told her. "Started with just 50 when I bought the place." "That's impressive growth," Ruby said. "You must work very hard." "Every day," he agreed without complaint, "but there's satisfaction in building something with your own hands, watching it grow." They reached a spot where the creek widened into a small pool shaded by cottonwood trees. Isaac spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. As they ate, Ruby found herself relaxing more than she had in months. "How did you come to advertise for a bride?" she asked, curious about what had brought her to this place. Isaac seemed momentarily embarrassed. "It wasn't my idea at first. Reverend Thomas and his wife kept suggesting it." He looked out over the water. "After a while, I realized they were right. The ranch is established now, but a house needs a family to be a home." "And you couldn't find anyone locally?" Ruby asked, trying to understand. He shrugged. "Willow Creek's a small town, and he hesitated. I wanted someone who'd bring something different, new ideas, new perspectives." His eyes met hers. "Someone like you." The intensity of his gaze made Ruby look away. "But you don't know me. I'm learning," he said simply. "And I like what I'm discovering." The directness of his statement left Ruby flustered. No man in Boston would have spoken so plainly about his interest. There would have been months of formal calls, chaperoned outings, and veiled conversations before any declaration of admiration. "Tell me about your life in Boston," Isaac requested, sensing her discomfort and changing the subject. Grateful for the shift, Ruby described her childhood in a wealthy merchant family, her education, and the social seasons she'd navigated. "It was all very proper and predictable," she explained, "until my father's investments failed. And then I learned who my real friends were." Her voice turned bitter despite her efforts. "Most people disappeared the moment our fortune did. The ones who stayed, well, you know what they did." Isaac's expression darkened. "Sending you here as some kind of joke." "Yes," Ruby plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "Though I'm beginning to think their joke may have backfired." "How so?" Isaac asked. Ruby gestured to the beautiful landscape around them. "This isn't the punishment they imagined. They thought I'd be miserable, married to some crude, uneducated man who'd treat me like property." She met his eyes directly. "You're not what they described at all." A slow smile spread across Isaac's face. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should," Ruby said, surprised by her own boldness. As they packed up their lunch, a distant rumble of hooves caught their attention. Isaac immediately tensed, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip that Ruby hadn't noticed before. "Get behind me," he instructed, his voice suddenly hard. Ruby did as he asked, fear prickling along her spine. "What is it?" "Not sure yet," he muttered, watching the ridge above them. 4 riders appeared, moving rapidly toward them. As they drew closer, Isaac relaxed slightly but remained on guard. "Armstrong," the lead rider called as they approached. "Thought that was you." "Sheriff Burke," Isaac acknowledged. "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff, a weathered man in his 40s, dismounted. His eyes fell on Ruby with undisguised curiosity. "Madam," he greeted with a tip of his hat before turning back to Isaac. "Got word from the Thompson place, cattle missing again. Thought you should know, seeing as you're next along the creek." Isaac frowned. "How many head?" 20, maybe more. Third ranch this month." The sheriff lowered his voice, though Ruby could still hear him. "Johnson's men are getting bolder." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Any proof it's them?" "Nothing that would stand up in court," Burke admitted. "But we all know." I'll double the night watch, Isaac said. Thanks for the warning. The sheriff nodded, then glanced at Ruby again. This the bride from back east we've been hearing about, Isaac straightened. Sheriff Burke, may I present Miss Ruby Reed? Ruby, Sheriff Burke and his deputies. Ruby managed a polite smile despite her confusion over the tense conversation. A pleasure to meet you, Sheriff. Likewise, Miss Reed, welcome to Colorado. The sheriff remounted his horse. We'll keep riding the boundaries, Isaac, watch yourself. After they rode away, Ruby turned to Isaac. What was that about? Who is Johnson? Isaac sighed, leading her back to their horses. Reginald Johnson owns the biggest ranch in the territory and wants to own more. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. And the missing cattle, Isaac helped her mount before answering. Cattle rustling happens out here, but the pattern lately is suspicious. Small ranches lose stock, can't sustain their operations, and Johnson swoops in with an offer when they're desperate. That's terrible, Ruby said, shocked by such blatant criminality. Can't the sheriff do anything? Not without proof. Isaac mounted his own horse, and Johnson's careful about that. His hands do the dirty work while he maintains his respectable businessman image in town. They rode back toward the ranch house in thoughtful silence. Ruby was beginning to understand that the idyllic beauty of this place came with very real dangers and challenges. Does this happen often? She asked. The rustling, I mean. More lately, Isaac admitted. I've lost some cattle myself, though not enough to cripple operations. I think Johnson's been biding his time with me, wearing me down slowly. Is that why he sent someone to make another offer yesterday? Isaac nodded, impressed by her observation. He likely thinks a new wife would make me more inclined to sell and move somewhere safer. He glanced at her. Little does he know my bride is made of sterner stuff. The casual way he referred to her as his bride sent an unexpected thrill through Ruby, along with a twinge of guilt. He was still operating under the assumption that she might agree to marry him, while she... Well, she wasn't as certain of her plans as she had been upon arrival. That evening, Caleb and 2 ranch hands joined them for dinner. Ruby was surprised by the easy camaraderie around the table, so different from the formal dinners she'd known in Boston. Here, everyone ate together, sharing stories and laughter regardless of their station. After the meal, the men discussed increasing the night patrols, with Caleb organizing a rotation. Ruby listened, impressed by Isaac's leadership. He didn't issue orders so much as make suggestions that the men readily agreed with, respecting his judgment. When the men departed for their duties, Isaac walked Ruby to the base of the stairs. I'm sorry about the trouble with Johnson, he said quietly. I don't want you to feel unsafe here. I don't, Ruby assured him. Actually, I feel safer than I have in months. It was true, she realized. Despite the threat of cattle rustlers, there was something fundamentally secure about being in Isaac's home under his protection. His expression softened. Good, that's important to me. He hesitated, then added, Ruby, whatever you decide after your 2 weeks, I want you to know I'm glad you came. Joke or not, having you here has been. Well, it's been good. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. Thank you for making me feel welcome, she managed, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the dim hallway. For a moment, it seemed as though he might say more or perhaps do more, but Isaac simply nodded and stepped back. Sleep well, Ruby Reed. Good night, Isaac, she replied, making her way upstairs with a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with the day's exertion. Days on the flying fell into a rhythm. Each morning, Ruby woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, men calling to each other, horses nickering, the distant lowing of cattle. She found herself adapting more quickly than she'd expected, learning ranch routines and even helping Mrs. Peterson with household tasks when the older woman came to clean. Isaac made time each day to show Ruby different aspects of ranch life, from the calving pastures to the hay operation. Her riding improved steadily under his patient instruction, and soon she was confident enough to ride Daisy without his constant supervision. One morning, about a week into her stay, Ruby was helping Mrs. Peterson prepare preserves when they heard a commotion outside. Looking through the kitchen window, she saw several riders approaching, with Isaac walking out to meet them. Oh dear, Mrs. Peterson murmured, wiping her hands on her apron. That's Reginald Johnson himself. Ruby watched as a well-dressed man dismounted, flanked by four rough-looking cowboys. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in Isaac's posture as he greeted the visitors. "Perhaps I should go out there," Ruby said, concerned. Mrs. Peterson hesitated. "It might help. Johnson's less likely to make trouble with a lady present." Ruby quickly removed her apron and smoothed her hair before stepping onto the porch. The conversation stopped abruptly as all eyes turned to her. "Ah, you must be the new bride I've heard about," the well-dressed man said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Reginald Johnson, at your service, madam." "Ruby Reed," she replied coolly, taking Isaac's side. "I'm afraid you've caught us at a busy time, Mr. Johnson." Johnson's eyebrows rose at her direct manner. "My apologies for the intrusion. I was just explaining to Mr. Armstrong here that my offer to purchase his ranch has increased." "Substantially." Isaac's expression remained impassive, "and I was explaining that the flying isn't for sale at any price." Johnson sighed theatrically. "That's unfortunate, very unfortunate indeed." His gaze swept over the ranch buildings. "It would be a shame if anything were to happen to this fine place. The frontier can be so unpredictable." Ruby felt a chill at the thinly veiled threat. Before Isaac could respond, she stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, I grew up in Boston society. Do you know what that teaches a person?" She didn't wait for his answer. "How to recognize a bully disguised as a gentleman." Johnson's face darkened. "You do well to counsel your fiancée toward prudence, Miss Reed. A woman should want security for her future family." "My future husband provides all the security I require," Ruby replied firmly, surprising herself with both her words and the protective anger rising within her. "And he does so honestly, without resorting to threats or theft." One of Johnson's men started forward at the accusation, but Johnson held up a hand to stop him, his cold eyes fixed on Ruby. "You've made a poor choice of allies, Miss Reed. Armstrong is fighting a losing battle." "Then he fights with honor," Ruby said, her head high. "Which is more than can be said for some." Johnson's jaw clenched. He turned back to Isaac. "Control your woman, Armstrong, and reconsider my offer. It stands for 1 week." With that, he remounted his horse and signaled his men to follow. As they rode away, Ruby's confidence faltered. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just couldn't stand by while he threatened you." Isaac turned to her, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something warmer. "Don't apologize, that was." He shook his head in apparent wonder. "That was magnificent." Ruby flushed under his admiration. He was being a bully. Yes, he was. Isaac's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Thank you for standing with me." The sincerity in his voice made Ruby's heart race. "Of course, what were they exactly?" "Not truly engaged, despite what she'd implied to Johnson." "We're friends, aren't we?" Isaac's thumb brushed over her knuckles, sending warmth up her arm. "I'd like to think we're becoming more than that." Their eyes held for a long moment before Mrs. Peterson's voice from the doorway broke the spell. "Everything all right out here?" Isaac released Ruby's hand. "Fine, Mrs. Peterson. Johnson was just leaving." "Good riddance," the older woman muttered. "That man brings trouble wherever he goes." As they returned to the house, Ruby felt a shifting within her. She'd claimed Isaac as her future husband without thinking, and it had felt right natural even. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. In just a week, this place and this man had begun to feel like home in a way Boston never had. That evening, Isaac was unusually quiet at dinner. After they'd eaten, he invited Ruby to join him on the porch, where they sat watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Johnson won't take your defiance lightly," Ruby said finally, breaking the silence. "Will he?" Isaac shook his head. "No, he won't." He turned to face her. "Ruby, your 2 weeks are almost halfway through. You should know that things might get dangerous here. Johnson isn't known for his patience." "Are you suggesting I leave?" Ruby asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "I'm suggesting you have all the facts before you make your decision." His expression was serious. "I won't pressure you to stay, especially if staying puts you at risk." Ruby considered his words carefully. "I appreciate your concern, but I've spent my whole life avoiding risk, and look where it got me, betrayed by those I trusted and sent across the country as a joke." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm not running away again." Isaac studied her face in the dim light from the windows. "You're not what I expected, Ruby Reed." "Is that a good thing?" she asked, suddenly unsure. His smile was slow and warm. "The best thing when you stepped up to Johnson today. I've never seen anything like it." He hesitated, then added softly, "I've never met anyone like you." The intensity in his voice made Ruby's pulse quicken. "Isaac," a shout from the direction of the barn interrupted whatever she might have said. Isaac was on his feet instantly, reaching for his gun. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the sound. Ruby stood, torn between obeying and following. Another shout decided her, this one sounding like Rory's voice. She hurried after Isaac, her heart pounding. As she rounded the corner of the house, she saw flames licking up the side of the barn. Rory was pulling frantically at the doors while Caleb and another ranch hand raced from the bunkhouse. "The horses," Rory was shouting. "We gotta get the horses out." Isaac reached them first, yanking open the barn doors. Smoke billowed out and the frightened whinnies of the horses echoed from within. Without hesitation, Isaac plunged into the smoke. "Form a bucket line," Caleb shouted, already running for the well. Ruby gathered her skirts and raced to help, joining the line that quickly formed as more ranch hands arrived. She passed heavy buckets, her arms straining but determination keeping her moving from the barn. Isaac and two other men led horses out, the animals wild-eyed with fear. Ruby counted them anxiously, remembering there were 12 horses stabled for the night. Daisy appeared, led by a coughing ranch hand, and Ruby felt a surge of relief. The bucket line was beginning to have an effect, but the fire had taken hold of the hayloft, burning hot and fast. Ruby passed another bucket, searching the barn entrance for any sign of Isaac. He'd gone back in 3 times now. Finally, he emerged leading the last 2 horses, his face blackened with soot. As he cleared the doorway, a burning beam crashed down behind him, sending up a shower of sparks. "Everyone accounted for," he shouted to Caleb, handing off the horses to a waiting hand. "All men present, all horses out," Caleb confirmed. "But the barn's a loss." Isaac nodded grimly. "Keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings and post armed men at the perimeter." This was no accident. The battle against the fire continued for another hour. By the time they'd contained it, the barn was a smoldering ruin, though they'd managed to save the surrounding structures. Ruby found Isaac sitting on a crate near the well, his face streaked with soot and sweat as Rory helped him clean a burn on his arm. Without a word, she took over from the boy, gently washing the wound. "You should have stayed on the porch," Isaac said, though there was no anger in his voice, only weariness. "And you should have let someone else go back for the last horses," Ruby countered, carefully applying the salve Mrs. Peterson had brought. "But neither of us did the sensible thing, did we?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Guess not." Ruby finished bandaging his arm. "Was it Johnson's men? Can't prove it, but the timing's too convenient to be coincidence." Isaac looked toward the ruined barn. "They want to scare me into selling. Will it work?" Ruby asked quietly. Isaac's eyes met hers, steady and determined. "No, this is my home. I won't be driven from it." "Our home," Ruby said before she could stop herself. The words hung between them, momentous in their implication. Isaac stared at her, hope dawning in his expression. "Ruby, are you saying?" She took a deep breath, suddenly certain. "I'm saying I don't need the full 2 weeks. I know where I belong now." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a smudge of ash. "Are you sure? This isn't the easy life you were raised for. Easy isn't what I want." Ruby leaned slightly into his touch. "I want real, I want purpose, I want." She hesitated, then finished softly, "I want you." The kiss, when it came, was gentle despite the urgency of the moment. Isaac's lips were warm against hers, tentative at first, then more confident as she responded. It was nothing like the chaste pecks Ruby had experienced during formal courtships in Boston. This was a promise, a beginning, a declaration. When they finally parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably mention that I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood up to me in that hotel dining room." Ruby smiled, her heart fuller than she'd ever known possible. "And I've been falling in love with you since you offered me a choice instead of an ultimatum." "So you'll stay?" Isaac asked, his voice betraying a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "You'll marry me?" Yes, Ruby answered simply. I'll stay, I'll marry you, though not because of some arrangement made by others, because it's what I want. His smile was brilliant even through the grime of the fire. That's all I needed to hear. The next morning revealed the full extent of the damage. The barn was destroyed, along with the winter hay stored in its loft and various tools and tack. The horses, thankfully, were unhurt, though they'd had to be corralled in the pasture overnight. Isaac called the ranch hands together after breakfast, with Ruby at his side. We start rebuilding today, he announced. Johnson thinks this will break us, but he's wrong. We're stronger than he knows. The men nodded in agreement, their loyalty to Isaac evident in their determined faces. I've sent for the sheriff, Isaac continued, though I doubt we'll find proof of Johnson's involvement. We found boot prints heading toward the creek, Caleb reported. Followed them to where horses had been tied, at least 3 men. Isaac nodded grimly. Keep your eyes open, they might try something else. As the men dispersed to begin clearing debris, Isaac turned to Ruby. I need to ride into town for supplies. I'd rather you came with me than stayed here alone. I'd be happy to come, Ruby agreed. She'd grown more comfortable on horseback, but she still preferred riding with Isaac nearby. In town, their news spread quickly. The fire at the Flying A was the main topic at the general store, where Isaac ordered lumber and supplies for rebuilding. Johnson's gone too far this time, the storekeeper muttered as he tallied the order. Everyone knows it was his doing, even without proof. Fighting fire with fire isn't the answer, Isaac replied firmly. We'll rebuild and keep our guard up. As they left the store, Ruby noticed the stares and whispers that followed them. Word of their engagement had evidently spread as well. People seem very interested in us, she observed as they walked toward the telegraph office. Isaac took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a public declaration that would have scandalized Boston society. They're curious about the woman who tamed the confirmed bachelor of Willow Creek. Ruby laughed. Is that what I've done, tamed you, completely and utterly, he assured her with a smile. Though I hope you'll keep that information between us, I have a reputation to maintain. At the telegraph office, Isaac sent messages to neighboring ranches warning them about the fire and asking them to be vigilant. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, they nearly collided with Reginald Johnson himself. Armstrong, Johnson acknowledged coldly. His eyes flicked to their joined hands, then to Ruby. Miss Reed, I understand congratulations are in order. Thank you, Ruby replied with deliberate politeness. Though I'm surprised you'd offer congratulations after trying to burn down my fiancé's barn, Johnson's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation without evidence, young lady. Just an observation, Ruby returned calmly. Strange how troubles seem to follow your visits. Ruby, Isaac murmured in warning, though she could see the appreciation in his eyes. Johnson adjusted his expensive coat. I'd be careful with such talk, Miss Reed. Slander is a serious matter. He turned his attention to Isaac. My offer still stands, Armstrong. In fact, given your recent misfortune, I'm willing to be even more generous. The answer's still no, Isaac stated firmly, and it always will be. Johnson's smile was cold. We'll see about that. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Good day to you both. As he walked away, Ruby felt a chill despite the warm day. He's not going to stop, is he? No, Isaac admitted, but neither are we. Come on, let's finish our business and head home. On the ride back to the ranch, Ruby found herself worrying about what Johnson might try next. Maybe we should postpone the wedding, she suggested. Focus on rebuilding first. Isaac glanced at her, concern etching his features. Are you having second thoughts about marrying you? No, Ruby assured him quickly. About the timing, Johnson clearly wants to drive you away. Perhaps we should wait until things settle. Isaac guided his horse closer to hers. Ruby, if there's one thing frontier life teaches you, it's that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. I don't want to postpone our life together because of a man like Johnson. His words resonated with Ruby's own experiences. Life could change in an instant. Her father's death and financial ruin had proved that. You're right, she agreed. We shouldn't let fear dictate our choices. Isaac smiled, relief evident in his expression. Besides, once you're officially Mrs. Armstrong, Johnson will have to accept that I'm here to stay. The idea of becoming Mrs. Armstrong sent a thrill through Ruby. It was nothing like the resigned acceptance she'd felt toward potential marriages in Boston. This was excitement, anticipation, joy. "How soon can we be married?" she asked. Isaac's smile widened. "Reverend Thomas comes through town every other Sunday. He'll be here in 3 days." "Is that soon enough?" "Perfect," Ruby declared. 3 days to prepare wasn't much, but she didn't need elaborate preparations. She just needed Isaac. The next few days were a flurry of activity. The ranch hands began clearing the burned barn and preparing to rebuild while Ruby worked with Mrs. Peterson to ready the house for the small wedding celebration they'd planned. Word spread quickly through the area, and neighbors began arriving with offers of help for both the rebuilding and the wedding. Women brought food and decorations, while men came with tools and strong backs for the barn raising. "I've never seen anything like this," Ruby remarked to Mrs. Peterson as they prepared pies for the wedding supper. In Boston, people were always so concerned with appearances and social standing. "Here, everyone just helps. That's frontier life," Mrs. Peterson explained, crimping a pie crust with practiced fingers. "Out here, we depend on each other. Today, it's Isaac needing help with his barn and celebrating his wedding. Tomorrow, it might be the Thompsons or the Wilsons needing a hand. We all pitch in." Ruby found herself deeply moved by the community's response. These people had accepted her without question, embracing her as Isaac's chosen bride despite her sudden appearance in their midst. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Ruby awoke early, a mixture of nervousness and excitement fluttering in her stomach. She hadn't told Isaac, but she'd altered one of her Boston dresses for the occasion, a pale blue silk that had once been fashionably elaborate but was now elegantly simple. Mrs. Peterson and several neighboring women arrived to help her prepare, bringing wildflowers for her hair and a small gift, a handmade quilt for the marriage bed that brought a blush to Ruby's cheeks. "It's tradition," Mrs. Wilson explained as she helped arrange Ruby's hair. "Every bride needs something new to start her married life." By midday, the house was ready. The sitting room had been transformed with flowers and ribbons, and outside, tables were set up under the trees for the celebration afterward. The half-rebuilt barn stood in the background, a testament to the community's support and Isaac's determination. Ruby stood at her bedroom window, watching as Reverend Thomas arrived and guests began gathering. She hadn't seen Isaac since the previous evening, another frontier tradition. She'd been told to keep the bride and groom apart on their wedding day until the ceremony. A knock at her door revealed Caleb, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Miss Ruby." "Isaac asked if I'd walk you down, seeing as you don't have family here." Ruby felt a rush of gratitude toward Isaac for his thoughtfulness. "I'd be honored, Caleb, thank you." Downstairs, soft conversation hushed as Ruby appeared on Caleb's arm. She had eyes only for Isaac, who stood before the fireplace with Reverend Thomas. He wore a clean black suit she hadn't seen before, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught her heart, a mixture of awe, joy, and love that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was simple and sincere. Reverend Thomas spoke of partnership, commitment, and building a life together, words that resonated deeply with Ruby as she stood beside the man who had so unexpectedly become her future. When Isaac recited his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I, Isaac Armstrong, take you, Ruby Reed, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and partner with you in all things. I'll stand by you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, until death parts us." Ruby's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her own vows, emotion making it difficult to speak. When she finished, Isaac squeezed her hands gently, his eyes conveying everything words couldn't express. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thomas proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Isaac, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet unmistakably heartfelt. Applause and cheers erupted around them as they turned to face their guests as husband and wife. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Ruby had experienced in Boston. There was dancing to fiddle music, abundant food, and genuine warmth from everyone present. Even Sheriff Burke made an appearance, congratulating them and discreetly stationing a deputy nearby, a precaution against potential trouble from Johnson. As the afternoon waned into evening, Isaac found Ruby sitting with Mrs. Peterson, watching the dancing. "May I steal my wife away?" he asked with a smile that still made Ruby's heart flutter. "She's all yours," Mrs. Peterson replied with a knowing wink that made Ruby blush. Isaac led her away from the celebration toward a quiet spot near the creek where they'd had lunch that first day. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Ruby admitted, leaning into him. "A month ago I was desperate and alone in Boston. Now I'm here with you, with all these wonderful people who have welcomed me so warmly." "They see what I see," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A remarkable woman who belongs here." Ruby turned in his arms to face him. "I do belong here with you." She hesitated, then added, "I never told you this, but when I first realized what my friends had done, sending me as a mail-order bride as some cruel joke, I was devastated. But now, Isaac prompted gently when she trailed off. "Now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Ruby reached up to touch his face, marveling that this man was now her husband. "They thought they were punishing me, but they actually gave me the greatest gift, a chance at real happiness." Isaac captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. The joke was on them all along. Their laughter mingled in the evening air, a promise of the joy they would share in the years to come. And when Isaac lowered his head to kiss her properly, away from the watchful eyes of their guests, Ruby knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later that night, with the celebration wound down and guests departed, Ruby stood in the bedroom that was now theirs. Mrs. Peterson had helped her change from her wedding dress into a simple white nightgown, another item she'd altered from her Boston wardrobe. Isaac's gentle knock preceded his entrance. He'd removed his jacket and tie but was otherwise still dressed. His eyes softened when he saw her, standing nervously by the bed. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Ruby smiled, some of her nervousness easing. "So are you." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Ruby, I want you to know something. I never expected to find what we have. When I sent for a mail-order bride, I was hoping for companionship, maybe eventual affection." His thumbs traced circles on her wrists. "I never dreamed I'd find someone who fits into my life, my heart, so perfectly." His words melted the last of her anxiety. "I never expected to find love at all," she admitted. "Especially not at the end of a journey that began as a joke." Isaac's smile was tender as he drew her into his arms. "Well, Mrs. Armstrong, I can promise you this is no joke. What I feel for you is more real than anything I've ever known." "I love you, Isaac," Ruby whispered against his chest, his arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Ruby Armstrong, more than I have words to express." No more words were needed as Isaac lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a future neither of them had anticipated, but both now embraced with open hearts. The days following the wedding were filled with hard work and quiet happiness. The community barn raising continued, with the structure taking shape more quickly than Ruby would have believed possible. Isaac worked alongside his men from dawn till dusk, coming home exhausted but satisfied with their progress. Ruby settled into her role as mistress of the flying with enthusiasm. She organized the household, worked with Mrs. Peterson to put up preserves for the coming winter, and even began learning to cook under the older woman's patient guidance. A week after the wedding, Ruby was in the kitchen making bread when she heard riders approaching. Her first thought was of Johnson and his men, but peering through the window, she recognized Sheriff Burke and two of his deputies. Isaac was already walking out to meet them, wiping his hands on a rag as he came from the half-built barn. Ruby quickly set aside her dough and followed. "Sheriff," Isaac greeted as she joined him, "twice in a week. To what do we owe the pleasure?" Burke dismounted, his expression serious but with a hint of satisfaction. "Good news, Armstrong. We caught Johnson's men red-handed trying to rustle the Wilsons' cattle last night." Isaac's eyebrows rose. "You have proof it was Johnson behind it." "Better than proof," Burke said with a grim smile. "We have a confession." One of his men turned on him, admitted Johnson's been orchestrating the rustling to drive smaller ranchers out of business. Ruby gasped. That's wonderful news. What will happen to Johnson? He's been arrested. Trial's set for next month, but with the evidence we have, he'll likely be heading to territorial prison for a good long while. Burke looked around at the rebuilding effort. Thought you'd want to know you can ease up on the night patrols. The threat's been neutralized. Isaac shook the sheriff's hand firmly. That's the best wedding present we could ask for. Thank you. After the sheriff departed, Isaac pulled Ruby into an embrace right there in the yard, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. Can you believe it? Johnson's finished. Ruby laughed as he spun her around. It seems justice prevails after all. This calls for a celebration, Isaac declared, setting her back on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. No more looking over our shoulders, no more worrying about what Johnson might try next. That evening, they shared the news with the ranch hands over a special dinner Ruby prepared. The mood was festive, a weight lifted from everyone's shoulders. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ruby leaned against Isaac's shoulder. It feels like we can truly begin our life together now without that shadow hanging over us. Isaac's arm tightened around her. I've been thinking about that, about our future. He hesitated, then continued. What would you think about expanding the house, adding a few rooms? Ruby looked up at him, curious. What did you have in mind? A proper library for your books, he suggested. And maybe a nursery. The implication made Ruby's heart skip a beat. A nursery. Isaac's expression was a mixture of hope and vulnerability. I'd like to have a family with you, Ruby. Children to fill this house with laughter. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But only if that's what you want too. Ruby thought about the lonely girl she'd been in Boston and the woman she was becoming here in Colorado. She thought about children with Isaac's blue eyes and her stubborn chin running free on this beautiful land. I want that more than anything, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A family, our family. The kiss they shared sealed this new promise between them, a promise of a future filled with love, children, and the home they would build together. 6 months later, Ruby stood in the doorway of the newly built library, watching as Isaac installed the last of the bookshelves he'd crafted himself. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the room that had been his surprise gift to her. It's perfect, she said, admiring the craftsmanship. Better than any library in Boston. Isaac set down his tools and came to stand beside her, his arm automatically going around her slightly thickened waist. Their first child was due in just 4 months, a fact that filled them both with excited anticipation. Only the best for my wife, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. And the mother of my child. Ruby leaned into his embrace, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. What had begun as a cruel joke had transformed into the greatest blessing of her life. She had found love, purpose, and belonging in this place that once seemed so foreign. What are you thinking about? Isaac asked. Noticing her contemplative mood, Ruby smiled up at him. I was thinking about how sometimes life's cruelest jokes become its greatest gifts. She placed her hand over his where it rested on her belly. And how grateful I am that those women in Boston thought to send me to you. Isaac's eyes softened. I thanked God every day for their poor judgment. He knelt suddenly, pressing a gentle kiss to her rounded stomach. And I'll thank him every day for the family we're building together. As Ruby ran her fingers through her husband's hair, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in less than a year. The frightened, humiliated woman who'd stepped off the train in Willow Creek was gone, replaced by a confident wife and soon-to-be mother who had found her true home on the frontier. I love you, Isaac Armstrong, she said, her voice filled with the depth of emotion that had only grown stronger with each passing day. Isaac rose to his feet, gathering her in his arms. And I love you, Ruby Armstrong. You're the only woman I'll ever love, the only one I was meant to find. As their lips met in a tender kiss, Ruby knew that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face them together. What had begun as a bride sent as a joke had become a love story. Neither of them could have imagined a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives.